Richard Kuklinski was a man of physical contradictions. Standing 6 feet 5 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds, he was a massive figure in the quiet suburbs of Dumont, New Jersey. To his neighbors, he was a businessman, a father of 3, and a husband who kept his lawn manicured and his house painted. But to the New York organized crime families he contracted for, he was a tool, a weapon, a man who had earned the nickname the Iceman, not just for his demeanor, but for his method of freezing bodies in industrial freezers to mask the time of death, confusing medical examiners and throwing off police investigations. By the early 1980s, Kuklinski had established himself as one of the most prolific and efficient contract killers on the East Coast. He did not belong to a specific crime family. He was an independent contractor, utilized by the Gambinos, the DeCavalcantes, and others because he was thorough, he was silent, and he was terrifyingly creative. He used cyanide sprays, ice picks, shotguns, and bare hands. But there is one incident in his criminal career that stands apart from the professional hits. It was not a contract. It was not strictly business. It was a personal experiment in suffering that Kuklinski later detailed in taped interviews with a cold, flat affect that disturbed even experienced criminologists. The incident involved a man whose identity has been debated in criminal files but is often referred to in Kuklinski's confessions simply as an associate who made a fatal error in judgment. This associate was involved in a business deal with Kuklinski. The nature of the deal was typical for the time, likely related to narcotics or loan sharking. The man owed Kuklinski a significant amount of money. In the world of organized crime, debt is common, but the reaction to debt determines survival. This man did not pay. Instead, he postured. According to Kuklinski's account, the man began to spread rumors. He talked in social clubs and bars, claiming that Kuklinski was overrated, that he wasn't as dangerous as his reputation suggested. Worst of all, the man made a vague, veiled threat regarding Kuklinski's family. He implied that if Kuklinski pressed for the money, there would be consequences for his wife and daughters. This was a violation of the strict compartmentalization Kuklinski maintained. His family was his cover, his separate life. Threatening them was not a business tactic. It was a death sentence. Kuklinski did not react with immediate rage. He did not engage in a public shouting match. He went silent. He began to plan an operation that would serve 2 purposes. It would eliminate the problem, and it would satisfy his own morbid curiosity about the limits of human fear. On a weekday afternoon, Kuklinski tracked the man down. The abduction was simple and efficient. Kuklinski drove a nondescript van, the type he often used for his business. He intercepted the man on a quiet street. Given Kuklinski's size and strength, the physical confrontation was brief. He overpowered the target, forced him into the back of the van, and restrained him. There was no conversation. Kuklinski did not yell or demand his money. He simply secured the man and began to drive. The drive took several hours. They left the dense urban sprawl of New Jersey and headed west, crossing into Pennsylvania. Kuklinski was familiar with the rural areas of Pennsylvania. He knew of deep wooded areas and remote locations where people could disappear without a trace. Specifically, he knew of a cave system. These were not tourist caves with guided paths. They were damp, dark, natural formations deep in the woods, rarely visited by hikers and completely invisible from the main roads. Kuklinski parked the van off a logging trail. He hauled the man out. The victim was bound, gagged, and terrified, but he was still alive. Kuklinski dragged him through the woods and into the mouth of the cave. They descended into the earth. The temperature dropped. The air became heavy with the smell of wet limestone and soil. Kuklinski took the man deep inside, far enough that no scream could ever reach the surface. In a small chamber within the cave, Kuklinski began his work. He did not beat the man. He did not produce a gun. Instead, he anchored the man to the rock floor. He used chains securing the man's arms and legs so that he was in a seated position, his back against the cold cave wall. The man could move his head. He could breathe, but he could not escape. He was effectively a statue. Then Kuklinski set up the documentation. He had brought a video camera. In the early 80s, video equipment was bulky and required significant light. Kuklinski set up a battery-operated lighting rig. He positioned the camera on a tripod, framing the shot so that the man's entire body was in view. He checked the focus. He checked the audio. He wanted a record of what was about to happen. The final component of the plan was inside a box Kuklinski had carried into the cave. He placed the box on the ground a few feet from the bound man. He removed the cover. Inside was a cage, and inside the cage were rats. These were not laboratory rats. According to Kuklinski, they were wild rats he had trapped. They were large, aggressive, and crucially, they were starving. Kuklinski had intentionally withheld food from them for several days. The rats were frantic, scratching at the wire mesh, smelling the scent of the man in the damp cave air. Kuklinski approached the victim and removed the gag. The man immediately began to plead. He offered money. He apologized. He begged for his life. Kuklinski did not respond to the pleas. He simply explained the situation. He told the man that he was leaving. He told him that the camera was rolling, and he told him that the cage door was rigged to open. Kuklinski rigged a pulley system, or a simple string mechanism, that allowed him to open the cage remotely or on a delay. He explained that the rats would eventually come out. He explained that they were hungry. Then he turned on the camera, ensured it was recording, and opened the cage door. He did not stay to watch. Richard Kuklinski turned his back, walked out of the cave, climbed back into his van, and drove back to New Jersey. The drive back took hours. During this time, the man in the cave was alone. The camera was running. The light was casting long, flickering shadows, and the rats were free. What happened next is known only because of the tape Kuklinski later described. The video captured the timeline of the attack. At first, the rats were cautious. They explored the cave floor. The man screamed, kicked his legs, and tried to make noise to scare them away. For a while, this worked. The rats were wary of the movement and the noise, but as time passed, hunger overrode fear. The tape recorded the first rat approaching the man's boot. It recorded the man's screams intensifying. It recorded the moment the rats realized the man was immobilized. They began to swarm. Kuklinski returned to the site days later. He did not go to save the man. He went to retrieve his equipment. He entered the cave, which now smelled of death and decay. He found the body. The rats had done their work. The man was dead. Kuklinski collected the camera and the cassette tape. He left the body where it was. In the deep caves of Pennsylvania, decomposition and scavengers would eventually erase all evidence. The man was simply another disappearance, another missing person statistic in the tri-state area. Kuklinski drove home with the tape. This is where the story shifts from a brutal murder to a study in psychopathy. Most killers, even professional ones, want to forget the act. They kill for money or necessity and then move on. Kuklinski was different. He wanted to relive it. He waited until he was alone in his house. He put the tape into his VCR. He sat down to watch the footage of the man dying. In his later interviews, specifically those conducted by psychiatrist Dr. Park Dietz and author Philip Carlo, Kuklinski was asked about this specific tape. He was asked how he felt watching a man being eaten alive. He was asked if he felt guilt, disgust, or horror. Kuklinski's answer was factual and devoid of emotion. He stated that he was eating a sandwich while he watched the video. He remembered the type of sandwich. He noted that the man on the tape screamed for a long time. He noted that the rats were efficient. He said he watched the entire tape from start to finish while eating his lunch. He described it not as a torture session, but as an observation. He wanted to see how much the man could take. He wanted to see the mechanics of death. This detail, the sandwich, is often cited by criminal psychologists as a defining characteristic of Kuklinski's pathology. It demonstrates a complete lack of effective empathy. To him, the man on the screen was not a human being suffering. He was an object undergoing a process. The act of eating a meal while witnessing such extreme violence indicates a total disconnection between the emotional centers of the brain and the visual stimuli. The rat cave incident remained a secret for years. It was just one of many stories locked in Kuklinski's memory. He continued to operate throughout the 80s. He diversified his methods. He used cyanide to poison targets in crowded places, spraying them with a nasal spray bottle and watching them collapse from what looked like a heart attack. He used a crossbow. He used shotguns at point-blank range. He was a chameleon, changing his methods to suit the contract. However, his arrogance eventually led to his downfall. In the mid-80s, a task force was formed to catch him. It was a joint operation involving the New Jersey State Police and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. They knew Kuklinski was a heavy hitter, but they lacked physical evidence. He was too careful. He left no forensics. The authorities brought in an undercover agent, Dominic Polifrone. Polifrone posed as a drug dealer, an aspiring hitman who wanted to learn from the best. He spent months gaining Kuklinski's trust. They met in diners, in cars, and in parking lots. Kuklinski, feeling comfortable with his new protege, began to talk. He bragged about his methods. He bragged about the cyanide. And he hinted at the darker things he had done. During these recorded conversations, Kuklinski displayed the same cold matter-of-factness that he would later show regarding the rat tape. He discussed the price of killing a man as if he were discussing the price of a used car. He offered to kill a fictional target for Polifrone using cyanide to demonstrate his skill. This was the mistake the police needed. In December 1986, the task force moved in. They arrested Richard Kuklinski outside his home. His wife and children were inside, completely unaware that the man of the house was one of the most dangerous predators in the country. Following his arrest, the scope of his crimes began to unravel. Prosecutors linked him to 5 murders, but authorities suspected dozens more. Kuklinski, realizing he would never leave prison, decided to take control of his own narrative. He began to talk. He sat for hours of interviews with HBO for the documentary The Iceman Confesses. It was in these interviews that the story of the cave and the rats came to light. The police never found the specific cave. They never found the body of that specific victim. Without the physical remains or the tape itself, which Kuklinski likely destroyed or hid before his arrest, the story relies on his confession. However, investigators and psychologists found the account credible for several reasons. First, the details were consistent with Kuklinski's known behavior. He often experimented with his victims. He admitted to tying men up and leaving them in freezing temperatures to see how long it took them to freeze to death. He admitted to testing cyanide on stray dogs before using it on humans. The rat experiment fit his pattern of testing death. Second, the lack of emotion in his retelling suggested truth. Liars often add dramatic flair or try to justify their actions. Kuklinski did neither. He simply described the logistics, the chains, the camera, the cage, the sandwich. Third, his knowledge of the Pennsylvania woods was verified. He was known to dispose of other bodies in similar remote locations, including putting bodies in oil drums and leaving them in mine shafts. The story of the rats serves as a focal point for understanding the Iceman. It strips away the Hollywood glamour often associated with hitmen. In movies, hitmen are often portrayed as conflicted professionals or cool anti-heroes. The reality of Richard Kuklinski was far uglier. He was a sadist who derived satisfaction from control and suffering. The rat cave incident also highlights the terrifying vulnerability of his victims. The man who died in that cave was a criminal, yes, but his fate was disproportionate to any debt or insult. He was erased from existence, subjected to a primal nightmare, and turned into a home movie for a psychopath's entertainment. Kuklinski spent the rest of his life in Trenton State Prison. He died in 2006 at the age of 70. Even in death, he remained a subject of fascination and horror. The Rat Cave story endures as one of the darkest chapters in true crime history. It is a story that forces us to confront the reality of organized crime. It is not just about money, power, or territory. It is about individuals like Kuklinski who find a home in that world because it allows them to unleash their darkest impulses without restraint. The tape is gone. The cave is silent. But the image of Richard Kuklinski sitting in his living room, eating a sandwich while the television flickered with the images of a man dying in the dark, remains burned into the record. It is the ultimate evidence of a man who was hollowed out, a man who looked into the abyss and didn't just blink, he laughed. This narrative is not just a recounting of a murder. It is a factual breakdown of a method. It demonstrates the planning, the execution, and the aftermath of a crime that was designed not just to kill, but to terrify. It serves as a reminder that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who look like neighbors, the ones who mow their lawns on Sundays, hiding the darkness behind a facade of normalcy. When Richard Kuklinski died, he took the location of the cave to his grave. Somewhere in the woods of Pennsylvania, there may still be rusted chains bolted to a rock wall, the only physical evidence of the nightmare that took place there. The body is long gone, reclaimed by the earth. But the story remains, a cold, hard fact in the file of the Iceman.